on to Disney, where I worked on Pixie Hollow and worked on the Disney Fairies franchise. Some of you may be familiar. A lot of our player base on The Sims used to play that, so it's been kind of a nice graduation to be able to work on that product. I also worked at Zynga as a game designer and as a producer. Worked on franchises like Farmville, Frontierville, Chefville, all the Ville games. Really love Decorators. Also worked on Zynga Poker and was part of an R&D group where we developed products for a lot of messenger apps like, what was it? Facebook Messenger, iMessage with Apple, and also Snapchat. And then I also got the chance to work on Words with Friends. Wordle is like really interesting to me. I kind of have to stay away from it because I am very obsessed with word games. And then I moved to Austin, Texas about 2 years ago to work with a company called Boss Fight Entertainment. They are based out of Dallas. And we did a partnership with Play Studios, who develops casino products. And so I worked with that company, got them from green light to ship in a year. If you ever worked in the game industry, you don't know what a feat that is. And we released this really beautiful bingo game, which I'm very, very proud of. So fast forward to today, I currently am working as the Senior Creative Director on the Sims 4 franchise. So I oversee, we have 2 creative directors that oversee our live operations group and our packs and EPs. And then I work with the team on driving what the next roadmap is going to be for the Sims 4. But who am I really, right? We're not our jobs. I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm known as a Chicana. I am a Mexican American, and I love where I grew up because I got to experience a lot of diversity in LA. I am the youngest of 5 children. I have 4 older brothers, so you can imagine I had a lot of gaming partners growing up, which was really great. And we were also very much into sports, and all of us got varsity jackets except for one of them. We don't talk about that very much. And then on the far right, those are my my grandmother and my mom. They hold a very special place in my heart. They live in, well, my mom was in California. My grandmother passed away a couple of years ago. I then ventured off in my life to San Francisco, as many of us do in the tech industry, where that's where I got my job at Zynga, and I lived there for about 10 years. Definitely learned a lot about the entrepreneurial spirit there. I currently live in Austin, Texas, as I mentioned. My partner and I own a house, which was very challenging to do in California, so we're really happy about that. We live with our cat, Yoda. He actually sounds like Yoda kind of when he growls, so that's why it's his name. And we really love to cook. It's something that we're super passionate about. I make a lot of Mexican food at home just because I learned it from my grandparents, but we do try a bunch of other cuisines as well. I'm really obsessed with entertainment and media. I think that's where we get a lot of our learnings about the world. And so I'm very specific in what I watch and who I pay attention to, because it really can affect us in our day-to-day. I'm very obsessed with RuPaul's Drag Race. It's by far my favorite. I'm now going back to watch all the earlier seasons, and just really love the show and the messages that come out of that. I also recently started getting into Stoicism. I think it's been a great kind of like gap filler for, I'm no longer religious, I'm more spiritual, but I did grow up Catholic. And this has kind of been a nice way of getting more into philosophy that isn't really a religion. And also Ryan Holiday is a Texas native as well. And so I kind of feel like it really solidifies me being in Texas. A book that I'm currently reading is Fresh Banana Leaves, Healing Indigenous Landscapes Through Indigenous Science by Dr. Jessica Hernandez. I just started it, but if anyone is reading this or has read this, please talk to me about it because I'm kind of obsessing about it right now. Okay, so before I get into the meat of my keynote, just want to let everyone know that it does contain some challenging topics about depression, family mental abuse, and addiction. So if you're uncomfortable at any time, no hurt feelings if you shut off. Okay, so I wanted to talk about what I've kind of struggled with. I was at a group session at work where we had a lot of Latino professionals just talking about how do we negotiate our family life at home and being in the workplace. It can be a challenge for some of us who perhaps didn't grow up with a certain background that was conducive of being in the workplace. And so one thing that I took away from that was it's hard for a lot of us, I think, at work because we don't have a lot of people we talk to that we share a lot of these struggles with. And the best way to kind of get through it is to talk about it. And so I'm here to share my story. I hope it inspires some of you, or maybe you can take something away to help you if you run into something in the future. A big one is toxic masculinity and femininity. I grew up in a very traditional household with traditional values, which don't always work well in the workplace. And we've kind of seen a shift in the industry where this was very pervasive, and the industry has been working on battling a lot of these things. But as a leader, you kind of look at yourself, how do I want to own the room? Right? I don't want to repurpose kind of what I've learned and, you know, being a power hungry person, ladder climbing and taking everyone down. I come from a space of more a nurturing place. But it can often feel like, does that make me not powerful or strong? And so it's something that we constantly talk about with, especially not just women, but people that don't identify as super masculine in the workplace. Family teasing was a really hard one for me. Sometimes teasing can be lighthearted and funny, and, you know, we kind of do some self-deprecating jokes, but sometimes that sticks with you. And when you're not doing well, you're like, oh, I guess that's just me. I'm just clumsy, or I forget things, and that's just who I am. But you kind of start to think about that, and it's like, well, should I have been late to that meeting? Should I have missed that deadline? Is there something I can be doing to really take control of my own work? And what are the messages that I'm hearing that make me think that this is just who I am? And so that was another issue that I kind of had to work with. Family drug abuse and alcoholism. Many of us from different backgrounds, I'm sure, have dealt with this in their families or in their own life. You know, when we move away from home and we're trying to really adjust ourselves as a single person living in a new city, sometimes you get that phone call at home that something's happened to a family member, and right, what do you like? Do you drop your work and go back home, or do you just kind of stay where you are and go back to the office the next day? And you kind of have this mental cloud over you, trying to understand, how do I do this job today when I'm feeling all these emotions inside? Also constantly worrying about what people think of me. Definitely growing up in a family of teasing and toxic masculinity and femininity, there's always a pressure to be and present in a certain way, and kind of like doing things so people can think highly of me, and being concerned if I drop the ball that people are like not going to like me or disrespect me, or heaven forbid I gotten fired. So that was a big stressor in my life. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, just kind of keeping it together at work. There's some situations I'll get in and I'm like, you clearly had a really awesome childhood. And I just think back to like, wow, like I really wish that I had that. I was in a meeting where a coworker was like, yeah, I got back from this really great family vacation with my parents and we had a wonderful time. And I kind of made this offhand joke, which didn't land very well, like, oh, that's cool that you like your parents. And my coworker looked at me like, oh, there's something deep there. And so just kind of reminding myself that like, there's some things that I really shouldn't be taking to work. I should definitely talk about it, and maybe I should go see a therapist on that. Self-deprecating humor does not really land well. And then the big tie-in was really having healthy debates versus dysfunctional arguments. And so we'll go more deeply into that in this presentation, but this all kind of like culminated into, how do I defend my work? How do I have debates on the job? How do I work with superiors and authority? And how do all these things affect that? So I really love Encanto. It's a really beautiful movie, and I think it really expresses a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. But as we know, not everyone ends in hugs and repaired relationships. I was going on my Facebook feed and seeing how people were reacting to this. Like, it really reminded them of people in their own life that were putting pressure on them to succeed. And that some of that was toxic and unhealthy. And I remember one person posted, like, I don't get the story at all. Why would you be best friends with somebody who's kind of put so much pressure on your life, even if you didn't succeed in the way they wanted you to? And so just commenting to her, I was like, this is the dream that I think a lot of us have, is that we have that connected relationship with our family, no matter who we are, and we're able to have that conversation in a healthy way and kind of fix and mend a lot of that hurt. So my father is the grandmother in Encanto. He wanted so badly for us to succeed in life that he really sacrificed his body and his own self-care, which really wasn't a word back then. People just kind of worked quite a bit and went home, and then went back to work, and you really never saw some of your family members. And he did this to ensure our success. But he also had a really bad anger issue. And this stemmed from a lot of really dark trauma in his own life that I learned much later. And that was a really hard thing, I think, for me and my siblings to reconcile, and had a really big impact on our relationships with other people. So I grew up in this family. My dad worked full time, and so did my mom. My mother took on a lot of the emotional work that most mothers do in a traditional family. She took care of all of us, made dinner, took us to all of our sports games, and was really there for us on an emotional level. Meanwhile, my dad, as he was supporting us, he worked 90-hour weeks. He worked a day job where he was an electrician for Los Angeles. And then at night and on weekends, he would go teach electrical code to people wanting to become electricians. And so he was putting food on the table, but kind of going above and beyond, sending us to Catholic school and getting us ready for college. And he did this because my grandparents did the same for him. They sent him to Catholic school. They were factory workers in LA, and definitely saw them working, to the bone. My grandfather would work in the forge with some very dangerous chemicals and heat. And so it was just a really big sense of pride for him to send us to school, and then also eventually sending us to college. And so I am thankful for this every single day. But the one thing I have a hard time reconciling is, how can someone who loves me that much have so much anger? And that was just something my brothers and I kind of had to deal with. And so his trauma meant he had to control everything around him, especially the people he loved most. And so this, pairing with a lot of the gender norms of society, just made it really challenging for us. And we kind of get through some of the this cycle of violence that happens. And so, male privilege, this could be any privilege, it doesn't have to be male, but just using his place in society and women's place in society for me to think oh, I can't really do anything more than maybe be a housewife, which I totally commend for people that definitely want to do that. And so we kind of started experiencing some of this as children, and we were definitely, I think, used as a place for him to gear some of his issues. And so for people that are not familiar, this is the cycle of abuse. We go through this honeymoon period where there's a lot of affection, there's love, there's financial stability, there's gift giving, and this person's the best person in the world. And they become kind of the superhero of your story, is that they're always trying to fix something. And then something happens, they start to get really tense. You kind of start to feel oh, I better kind of appease the situation or go to my room because I know something's about to happen. And then there's an explosive period where this person starts to say really mean things. In my case, it was more emotional abuse, and for my brothers as well. And they start to really dig at your self-worth and who you are. And for a lot of people that go through that, you tend to have a harder time with authority, and you also become someone who wants to become a fixer because you want the situation to go away. And so once the fixing starts to happen, there's the remorse stage where that person's apologizing. They feel really generally bad for what they did, And they start to apologize and try to make it up, which comes back to the honeymoon period, where they're showering you with gifts and they're telling you how much they love you, but then at some point the cycle starts over. That was a really hard one for me to identify. And so these are just kind of a few of the things that happen when you go into an abusive relationship. And then as someone who's a part of that, you kind of learn that that's okay. Like, you're like, okay, this is just normal. It's how people treat you. And when you talk to other people, sometimes they don't see what's happening, you know, in your home life. And so my friends and some of my other family members were like, your dad's the best person in the world. How could you feel this way about him? And I'm like, well, you don't see the cycle that I see every day. And so when we talk about things like teasing and you know, gossip or chisme in our culture as Latinos, it's very challenging because sometimes it can come from a space that might not be as healthy as maybe like some people take it to be funny, and something that people that they just do it because they love each other. And in our case, it kind of wasn't that way. And so I think with this, when you grow up in that environment, work becomes, or not work, when we're younger, school becomes a haven. You go to school, people are really great. You're doing things that are going to get you out of a situation. And like my siblings and I were just ready to leave the house at 18, just so we can go and thrive on our own. But it was kind of like, who are we doing that for at the end of the day? And so I was a straight A student. I did really well in sports. I was also a bit of a class clown. A lot of that humor came into the classroom as a way for me to kind of resolve what was happening at home. I was a very highly spirited person. I always put on like stuff for other students. I would be part of ASB just because I really like to see other people being happy. But I had a really down day at one point, and it was just kind of getting to be a bit too much. And as someone in junior high, I was just getting like really depressed, and I was struggling a little bit more in school. And one day I was just super down to a point where a teacher came up to me and was like, what's wrong with you? And so I just let him know I was having a really hard time at home, and I just don't know how to deal with all the pressure anymore. It's just getting me to a very dark place. I did kind of think about suicide in junior high, but it never got like very far. But those thoughts were starting to come into my mind of like, I don't really need this pressure in my life. And so what he told me essentially was, right, your success at the end of the day, no matter what anyone else thinks, it's for you. It's for no one else. Your success and failures are your own. If you decide you want to leave school and become homeless one day, like, your parents are still going to have their house and are going to live their own life. If you become successful, your parents can be proud of you, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter about any of that, because, right, you're going to own your own house one day, you're going to have this big successful job, you're very smart, and so just do it for yourself. And that just really lifted the biggest load off my chest. And they were like, I was like, I can just really just be authentically me and do things that make me happy. And so what did that mean for me? In high school, it meant I really never fit into any one group. I wasn't worried about being popular. I was in varsity sports as a freshman, as a runner. I took AP classes that I wanted to take, and I said no to ones that I wasn't interested in. And I love that because I got to know all of the jocks at the school. I just really love sports. I still do today. But I also got to have really close friendships with a lot of students in my AP classes who perhaps, I don't know how it is now. I hear high school a lot better, but you know, the kids that got teased a lot, they were like my closest friends in the world. And like, it did not matter to me who I was friends with. I was also on yearbook as a photographer. And in my rebellious stage, I would sneak out of the house and go do photography for local emo bands and screamo bands at the time, which also meant I got to go to places like the Roxy Theater and take photos of bands there. And I was just happy. I was thriving. I had a bunch of friends, and I had more intrinsic motivation to be myself and to really not care what others thought of me, until I got to the workplace and kind of hit that wall again. But when I did enter the workplace, I think what became the challenge is I was arguing a lot. You know, I think the way I was starting to deal with conflict is I was either stepping away or it was explosive. And so I didn't want to be explosive. And so that kind of resulted in me kind of coming in and appeasing situations, just so I wouldn't do the things that I had learned at home for communication. And so when I was in a religion class, I would just get up and walk out if the teacher said something I didn't agree with, which happened a lot in class. I had a very conservative teacher that kind of said some things that really bothered me. It also meant that I wasn't staying for the debate. I wasn't having a healthy conversation to move forward with what the issue was, which meant I also wasn't listening to the other side and what they were saying. I wasn't a debate club, so it's not like I couldn't have those conversations. It's just when I completely felt something I was passionate about, I would just kind of like lock up and then I would remove myself from the situation. Kind of looking back, I can see that's something my dad would do, except instead of walking away, he would explode. And so I just didn't have the tools from stimulus to what my response was to kind of manage what my response would be. And I had also just learned in high school about Hegel's dialectics and how do you have a conversation, how do you have a healthy debate to kind of change into a new thesis for something that you're thinking or something someone else is thinking. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit later. Okay, let's see. And so this started to becoming an issue, I think, more in my career, is how do I prepare myself psychologically to have debates? And these could be on things that don't really mean anything to really hard conversations. And so fast forwarding to the workplace, right? I had just gone out of college. I was really excited to be in the industry. I was well-rounded and I was just really ready to just tackle the world. But as a designer, you have to defend and debate every little decision that happens on your team. And everything is about negotiation, listening to the other side, and also realizing that your ideas are not the best ideas. The best ideas really come from a diverse thought and something that can either +1 your work, or maybe you need to iterate on your work just to make it that much better, is really what the design community is all about. But as a Huerta, we argue, we double down on our convictions. We also hurt feelings to get there. And someone always wins. There's that winner's mentality versus we collaborated to get through this process. So this was really hard for me because I would just shut down. I didn't want to be my dad, and I just didn't know what else to do. And so what happened with dysfunctional arguments is I would get really stressed out. I get a lot of anxiety, especially presenting at work. If you've ever worked with engineers or product managers, they have the most cutthroat questions that you'll ever face in your life about something that you're totally convicted in. And so I had a really hard time owning the room at some point. And my boss was like, you need to work on this if you want to move forward in your career. I also was assuming bad intentions. I assumed people didn't like me. Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Latina? Or do they just not appreciate the work that I'm putting forward? And it really came down to how I perceive myself, but also assuming that someone just didn't like what I had to say for a reason that had nothing to do with the work. Then I would get very flustered. And so I'd start shaking, or my voice would start to break, and I would also start not using my words, is what I call it. So I might start cussing, and it might be funny in the room, and people in the room have no idea. They're just like, oh, she's presenting, and maybe she's a little not confident, but there was just so much going on behind my mind that it just kind of came off as like, oh, it's funny that she's cussing. And so I had my same boss was like, you really need to use your words because I don't understand why you're frustrated. They're like, ah, shit, this situation sucks. And he was like, what does that mean? Like, what sucks about it? Because if I know, we can work on that and move past the obstacle. And so I really had to learn how to be concise and talk about what was not working, which is a huge part of my job. I have to find issues, I have to articulate it very quickly, and then we have to move on and solve those issues. I was, as I mentioned before, making myself smaller to appease. And so when you're having a debate, an argument with someone, sometimes it's just easier to let them win. And so that meant my work was kind of not as great as it could be because I was letting someone else tell me what to do. I was also living for gossip. There's a lot of gossip in the workplace, and sometimes it would be fun to feed that gossip. But after a while, that starts to create toxic thinking, and that's not great for morale for me personally, but also feeding someone else's negativity can have a really bad impact on themselves. And so how did that change the work? So I wasn't leading, I wasn't owning the room. I was letting other people own the room. It had nothing to do with gender. It had nothing to do with what I looked like. It was just me not being able to stand on my own 2 feet. I also wasn't making very good design decisions because I would start to lose conviction on what I was saying. I didn't know how to evangelize the work. I didn't know how to shop it around. I didn't know how to earn confidence. It required having healthy debates. And so the work would just kind of fall flat. And I wasn't being seen as a leader at that point. It also meant I wasn't ready to present for other people. And so a lot of what we talk about in our industry is what's your area of effect? And so who are you allowed to present in front of? Are we comfortable with you presenting to your peers, to your superiors, or to see staff and board members? And so I was just kind of stuck at my pod level for a while. It also meant I was argumentative with leadership rather than constructive. And so, yes, there's a lot of issues in the industry. There's a lot of problems on the ground day to day, but you don't get through it by arguing. You get through it by being constructive. You get through it by providing solutions. You get through it by hearing why is there an issue, and you start to realize that people really do come from good intentions and that they're perhaps overwhelmed and could just use your help to help solve some problems. This is a really important one for me because I do see a lot of, especially my more junior staff, struggling with this one. We kind of go into the workplace wanting to be the best, do really well for our audience, make sure people aren't working overtime. But the job is very overwhelming, and the more people can be constructive and pitch in and help out, it's really just better for everyone. So here's a few things that definitely helped. I saw a therapist. My therapist was also someone who had this cross-sectional background of having some very intense parents and also wanting to succeed. And so we talked about a lot of tools that can kind of help on the day-to-day. We talked about, I go through coaching and mentorship. I've been very fortunate to work at companies that do provide those resources. So when you are applying for jobs, I definitely recommend asking questions like, do you offer these types of programs? Because it really does help you at the end of the day. My company specifically, and I know when I worked at Zynga, they also offer group sessions. So you can find people from your community to talk about the same things, which is how I kind of got to this talk today, working with Latino professionals and understanding what they have gone through in their past. I started building healthy relationships with people and cutting out toxic ones. This meant both in my personal life and in my work life. The industry is full of toxic people, but it's also full of really wonderful people. And so when I look for a job, I am more concerned about who I'm working with, what their principles and values are, and also how do they decide that they want to lead a team. I've worked in studios where creative directors are expected to be a little bit more of a dictator and tell the team exactly what to do. I chose the job that I'm in today because I'm asked to be more of a coach and help train leaders and help people really thrive in creativity. I'm also way more data and research informed. So when you're presenting your work or even write your schoolwork, you have to back it up with data and research. This is every day of my life at my job. I look for things that help support a lot of the decisions I make. And so when we talk about a more junior designer versus someone that's more senior, a junior designer will design based on gut and what they think is fun versus someone more senior who's more studied, who's looking at competitors, who's looking at the data, and who's designing for an audience versus themselves and what they and their friends think is going to be a fun experience. I also have been able, with a lot of the tools that I've taken away from here, is identify toxic speech and reorienting conversations. So I went from someone who was very gossipy to helping people, like hearing them in their gossip, but then getting to the root of what the issue is and helping them get to more of a problem solving space. And so asking them, what are things that you control, or what are things that I control that I can help get through the situation? If there's really nothing I can do about it, perhaps take a pause and step away from what's happening. And so how did that impact my work? I was definitely a lot more aware. I was looking for tools and I ran into problems. And so instead of running away from something, I was finding ways to get through it and then kind of rinse, repeat. I was owning design decisions. And so I was starting to eventually get promoted in my career. People were trusting what I was doing. They were trusting what I was saying. Not just because of sound design decisions, but also because I was creating psychological safety in the workplace. I also became a lot more confident presenting and evangelizing the work. And then I eventually was starting to get invited to do presentations to C-staff and to board members. I got a chance to work with Mark Pincus at Zynga, and also eventually doing brainstorming sessions with Dean Gordon. Some of you might not be familiar with him. He was on the board of Amazon, the board of Zynga, and is just like a huge investor in Silicon Valley. And so just to get people's time like that is definitely, it's very validating because it means I'm trusted to not put my foot in the mouth at the end of the day. I was also starting to create healthy atmospheres for debates and also tough conversations. And so we do a lot of brainstorming at work, and we just have to make sure people feel safe in what they're doing, that they feel included. But we also get into really tough conversations, whether it's personnel needing to have kind of a talking to about their work style, all the way to very tough conversations, especially on games like The Sims, around diversity and inclusion, and how do we talk about that thoughtfully and respectfully. A lot of that has to do with deconstructing and dismantling kind of around that process, and people can feel very off guard by that. And so we have to create a space for people to have those conversations. And then I just overall became more positive and realistic. I think I used to err on being overly positive, or I was overly negative. But when you're overly positive, it can come off as not being altruistic and not being authentic. And so sometimes people, especially that err more in realism, which we do have a lot of that in the tech industry, it can be off-putting for them. And so being able to be more realistic about situations, but having an optimistic spin really kind of helps with that and finding that balance. So like, why does this matter? You really can't love yourself. Or if you can't love yourself, how are you gonna love somebody else? Famous quote from RuPaul. I love this quote because it's really about finding that balance of, before you can go take on a big project, before you can help someone in their own life, you really have to take care of yourself. A lot of my family members, especially the women in our family, they will go full gas, full throttle, helping someone else. They will go volunteer, they'll put on big parties, and then they'll get really exhausted and no one's kind of really helping them. And so when I do see that with my family, I try to remind them, you really need to refill your tank and engage in self-care, because the more you do that, the more you can help other people. And so it's why I do talks like this. It's why I volunteer. I can't do those things unless I'm in a good spot to do that. Okay, so back to tough conversations. We have a lot of tough conversations in society today. I don't expect people to be on the same page at all times. And I definitely look forward to having healthy conversations with people without expecting that they're going to change their minds in an instant. I can't control how others feel on a topic, but I can help provide a different perspective. And so I think someone asked, what was it like to be on a team as someone who is Latina? It's about me bringing in a new perspective and kind of having people create their own perspective out of that perspective. And so over time, if you have people hearing enough of a conversation, right, I bring in a new thought to someone who doesn't agree with me, don't expect them to change. They reconcile that thought, come out with a new thought, and then someone else in their life comes in with a similar thought that I might have had, and they start to kind of change over time. And so if we can have more of these healthy debates, I think it'll be better for society. And I just hope that someone feels inspired to kind of have more of these debates, deconstructing thoughts versus asking someone or telling someone that they're wrong and attacking it. This used to happen a lot in the industry where people would get into the room in a game studio and they would just argue and not relent. And that really creates a really bad space for people. And it also can lead to projects being late because someone's not listening to, like, we can't do that because like the tech won't support it, or we can't do it because it's going to land poorly on the audience. I've seen that happen so many times where someone's just not listening, and it ends up really bad for the player at the end of the day. So these are just a few of the tough conversations that we see in society. And they're definitely, I think, it's been a big challenge for people at home. Really don't expect everyone to be on the same page in all of these things, but in my world, these are really design decisions. Working on The Sims, these are topics that we talk about constantly. I think had I not been ready to represent a lot of these topics authentically or be able to handle these topics in a healthy way, I definitely couldn't do the job that I'm doing today. And so kind of through this process of becoming a leader, I've had to learn how to have healthy debates and how to talk about things that might make someone uncomfortable, but also giving them space to say what is challenging for them about these topics. And it becomes a very interesting atmosphere on a team where we do talk about things like this constantly. The Sims is a very progressive forward group. And even then, when you have a group working on the same game for 25 years, even some of those ideologies can become outdated. And so we constantly have these conversations and we're looking for ways to bring more diversity on our team. But that really comes through a lot of challenging discussions in what does diversity mean and how do we represent it authentically? Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to pose to this group as we're going through this conference, would love to talk to anyone about any of these topics and kind of what things that would you like to see in video games. One thing that I'm grappling with as I'm reading the Banana Leaves book is if we were to represent Indigenous cultures, like what would that look like? We have a very Western view on The Sims 4. And even if you were to insert something authentically, it's still a game that we're selling. It's still a game that is based in a world that is built primarily off of the United States. And so how do we start to become a more global market, but also telling these stories in a way that's very meaningful to other societies? And so what the key takeaways here is just how do we empower others? We do this by giving permission to ourselves and to the people that we work with to do what's right. Doing what's right is really hard sometimes, especially when you have a lot of people that disagree perhaps with what society is doing today. Owning the room. I have definitely some junior designers that constantly ask me about this. How do I how do I push forward an idea that might be uncomfortable? And I just say, you just own it. Like, if you believe in it, I will back you up and we can push this forward. Have healthy debates, right? Don't shy away from conversations unless you don't feel psychologically safe or you might have some harm. Just think about how you can prepare yourself for debate moving forward. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I've had some people that I've worked with who worked in places where asking for help was seen as weak, but we're trying to change that more in our industry. Is you really are not going to thrive in the workplace unless you ask for help, and your more senior staff members are there to help you. Try stuff and experiment. Don't be afraid of failure. I definitely love seeing people trying something new, even though they might come off as like, this might not work. And I'm like, well, just try it. Be uncomfortable. My job is 100% uncomfortable all the time. I have to talk to people about really tough topics. I have to present on work. And getting past that uncomfortable feeling of presenting to people, I think is a really good goal to have, because you start to learn what is it that makes you uncomfortable. And there's sometimes some things in the background you might not have thought of that makes it hard to talk to people. As I mentioned, learn from failure. Actively listen, even if you don't agree with something that someone is saying. Try to understand where they're coming from. I work in Austin, primarily my team's in California. I grew up in California. I think there's sometimes it's hard for people to understand, especially from a progressive group, why a conservative group might think a certain way and vice versa. But if people kind of just listened, a lot of people are really striving for the same thing. It's just the way that we talk about it might be off-putting. But if we get to kind of like the roots of the issues, we can kind of move forward from there and solve together. And then of course, be authentic. That's
So we have had quite a few questions that people want to ask. And I think what I'll do is I'll start by looking around the room a little bit to see if anybody wants to speak. And what I'll do is because we have a lot of folks online, I'll repeat your questions here. Otherwise, I do have some folks online that are already ready to ask their questions. So make sure I'm not missing anybody in the room.
Yes, thank you so much for a great talk and giving us a lot to think about, and your strength in speaking about this to a room basically strangers. We really appreciate that. I just wanted to give a comment sort of from a higher education perspective. And this is sort of directed at the students. What Ms. Huerta has been talking about is something that we as faculty really encourage students to engage in as part of their development. You know, we teach a lot of theory, we teach a lot of facts, we teach about the industry, but without the sort of self-awareness and going through the sorts of, you know, challenging processes that Ms. Huerta mentioned, that other stuff doesn't really mean much, right? It's that self-awareness, it's that autonomy, it's that strength that leads to authenticity, and that we can't teach. We can encourage it. We can have great presentations, and you know, the conversation that we're about to have related to what Ms. Huerta presented. But this is really where I think the rubber hits the road in terms of people bringing the different elements of their education, self-awareness, and that authenticity together. So please do take it carefully. And when we start talking about that in classrooms or online or wherever it might be, it's really what we're referring to. When you're walking across the stage and shaking the president's hand, right? There's a lot more behind it than the coursework that you've done in terms of the, you know, the professional preparation. It's that internal work that needs to be done, and where you fit in society and how you want to engage with others, how you want to be seen by others. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to turn over the mic to one of our online guests, Regina Mills at Texas A&M. Regina, want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. This, oh my gosh, just such a vulnerable and helpful talk to think about so many things. I actually had a question that comes from, I would like to do a project on like gaming Latinidad, like how Latinos are in games. But I'm really interested in actually trying to like take game design courses or like learn the game design tools in addition to just like understand what those things are. But it feels like I'm terrified of that. I'm an English professor. And so I guess I was wondering from like your perspective, what's like the best way to kind of enter into kind of learning some of these basics or being able to learn more about game design and like how to be a designer?
Yeah, I think I can hear myself. This question definitely comes up a lot, especially as you're trying to break into any industry. My number one advice is to look at different job recs in the industry, especially both senior level and entry level ones. And I would try to understand what resonates with you, and the types of skills that are required will definitely be listed. Of course, you kind of have to learn what some of those titles are. And so just go to like I would go to different companies that you think you would be interested in the future, but also ones that are very similar, and look at the type of roles that they have and just start reading on those roles. They do, usually the bigger companies do a really good job at inserting the description of a lot of those jobs. And so that's how you kind of start to learn what skills that you should start leaning into for earlier career and entry level roles. There are so many roles in the game industry. Some are technical, but a lot of them aren't. And so like you don't have to be an engineer. Not everyone needs to learn how to script and build a game. We have people in production, people that are project managers, people that do experience design, also user research. And so there's just like a ton of different avenues you can take. It's just kind of what inspires you and what can get you, I think, through that entry level work to start off. I've been fortunate enough to like, you know, start off as a designer. Some people start off as QA, but then decide like, well, do I want to be an executive producer one day? Do I want to be a creative director? Do I want to be a GM who's more business oriented? And so I got the chance to kind of try more entry level roles in a lot of those areas. And I think it helped me become well-rounded, but also discover while I was in my career, I can do some shifting and kind of learn where I wanted to go from there.
We had a follow-up to that question. It was, what avenue would be best to take coming from a production standpoint?
What avenue?
Yeah, of the discussion you were having in terms of this. If you wanted to go on the game on the production side of it.
Yeah, I would focus definitely on project management and organizational design. You don't have, there's really not much of a degree in that, but when you're doing your own work, think about right, you have something due. What are the steps I have to take to get to that thing being due? What are the dependencies I have to do, right? If you're doing a research project, you start to write a calendar of mini due dates to get there. And so when you're doing like an entry level production type of position, you're really thinking about how do we get the team from point A to point B on time, on budget, and on schedule. And so anything that gives you that background is really going to translate really well in an interview. And being able to show that you can not only do that for yourself, but for other people. So if you're doing group projects, how are you keeping your group on time and on schedule for a delivery?
So I'm going to turn over the mic now to screen name Brooklyn. Go ahead and speak up. Give one more chance, and then I'll move on to the next question. Oh, is the person speaking but muted? Oh, you might be muted on your side.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I think you were muted.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
Do you feel that games could be used to help people learn how to read and assess certain situations? For example, like mental or physical abuse or neglect? Like for a personal example, it took me a long time to realize that a female in my life was being neglectful due to the fact that in media examples, it's typically females are like dictated as like loving and only harsh to teach you a lesson, while it's usually the males that are in media considered to be the physical or mental abusers.
The question was, can games be used to identify?
Yeah,
You think?
yeah,
Yeah,
I'll repeat it for everybody,
mhm.
yeah. Just,
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a little bit of experience with this. So I first got into games because I wanted to make games either for education or for dealing with trauma. Definitely something that we do as people who struggle with either of those things. We want to fix them. And so I have seen products being made in this realm. When I first started my career as an intern, I worked for the Institute of Creative Technologies out of USC, and they did work with post-traumatic stress with soldiers. That, right, like when we talk to therapists, sometimes it's a challenge if we don't feel that they have experienced what we've experienced. How can they know what this is like? And so VR has been used in that aspect where, in that case with soldiers, they would wear a head mount display and be put into like a desert in the Middle East. And then they start to talk about their trauma, and they would start to layer different stimuli that had more intensity so they can go deeper into that trauma. Because I don't know about you, but I often black out a lot of my own upbringing just because it's my protection response. And so we are seeing games being developed, I think, to help people through that. Unfortunately, I don't see a lot of funding going towards that. We do see it more out of universities. And so like, absolutely, like games, I think games or technology, depending how you want to talk about it, can be used to help mimic those experiences. And then I think help the learner or help the patient identify, like, is this a safe situation, or like, is this something that's not good for me? And then providing some tools afterward on how to respond and deal with that situation. Right, gaming does this all the time, but providing situations for people to go through. It's just flipping that goal and that user need on its head to be about something that is a very serious topic.
Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Phil.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for this talk. I just found it just absolutely revelatory. I think it was just such a unique contribution, like, no other talk that I've heard from a game developer. And I really appreciate your transparency and honesty. And I think it really speaks to all of us to hear so many of the things you said. So for that reason, I almost want to apologize for asking a very nuts and bolts sort of question. But basically, I wanted to ask about your educational background and how it informs your day-to-day work. I saw that your BA was in interactive entertainment at USC, but you also have the master's in, was it educational psychology? And when I've talked to other game developers, they talk a lot about how multifaceted the day-to-day work is in the game industry, and how often a kind of interdisciplinary background has helped them. And so I kind of wanted to ask about that, as well as if I could ask like a little bit about the day-to-day work of a creative director and what that is.
Yeah, of course. I love this question. My background in ed psych and instructional design, I think, was probably the most beneficial thing I could have done. It really taught me to be user-centered and think about what is, do a gap analysis. What is demotivating for this learner to pick up a new behavior, and what types of design solutions can we implement either through curriculum and through technology to help them get over that hurdle. And so that can be translated to both game design with documentation, but what it's most usually used for is for organizational structures to build better learning environments in the workplace. And so like every company I've been on in a group where we've tried to create a learning org, because it's crucial to any job place, and it's definitely something crucial to game development. I think often when we think about game development, we think about the trade of game development, but not about the team building aspect and how workers perceive their work. And so this really helps in terms of I can bring a more of a well-rounded research experience and how do we solve some of our day-to-day issues. And so right now we're trying to push our team, and it's been actually every single team I've been on, how do we push people to self-motivate, to learn on the job? Some people are like, oh, I finished school and now I just work. And I'm like, no, like it's constant learning. This industry changes so fast. And the only way you're gonna grow is to constantly learn, and work can only provide so much. My work provides a ton of resources for learning, but I know that it's not the best way I learn. So I go outside to do things that help me in the best way that I can. And then on the flip side, it's just, yeah, using a lot of that background in other spaces, right? We have people who have economic backgrounds. We have people that have cinema backgrounds, and then folks that have things that are just not even related to games. They're still able to bring some of those learnings that they've had into the workplace that have had, I think, profound impact on a lot of the work.
So I think Jose has a question. I'll hand over the mic.
Yeah, I had a question. So, or can y'all hear me, by the way? Okay, I just want to make sure. So oddly enough, I kind of want to get into something similar that they're doing, except well, granted, I do play a lot of games myself. I want to get into the filmmaking business, and as a Chicano también, you know, like I want to be able to bring a lot of those things that you've talked about into that industry. And I know it's not like a one-to-one exact copy because obviously movies and games, but there's a lot of similarities in between. And so I wanted to know if there's any tips to bring some of these kinds of ideas into the movie making production. Do you have any that you may come to mind or that you're aware of?
I think this movie or the film industry and video game industry are going to start merging more and more. There's some studios that actually do work in game engines to develop some of their work. We also see a lot of like on the modeling and visual effects side, there's not a ton of difference, except on the gaming side, it has to be done in a way that's performant for someone's machine versus just rendered for a film. So there is a lot of crossover. I would say people like Jon Favreau are a really good example of someone that uses all kinds of technology into his filmmaking. And so I would encourage you to look at some of the work that he's doing and how he brings different technologies to the film industry. And then as I'm looking at what the gaming industry is doing with a lot of their mocap and work in doing CGI, it's just a matter of time where you're not going to notice the difference between the two. And you're probably going to one day see an animated, maybe doesn't look animated feature that's done in a game engine, which I think we're already seeing today in some cases. So there's definitely a huge overlap for sure.
If I could
Yeah, I
clarify.
think if anyone's played Detroit Become Human, it's one of the ones a lot of my students talk about where you walk into somebody playing it, and if it wasn't for the diegetic space of like the buttons on screen, you could easily throw that off for a really good science fiction thriller.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's also the Choose Your Own Adventure that Netflix has been doing. And with Netflix starting their gaming studio, it's just a matter of time where they start to cross over original content that is more interactive for sure. Yeah.
Did you want to talk a bit about the creative director,
Yeah.
sort of nuts and bolts as well?
Yeah, so the main MacGuffin, I love MacGuffins, that's the goal of that really gets you on a journey in a film. The main MacGuffin for my job is every year I want to have a deck that says what we're going to do for the next year or so on our game. And then I have to think about all of the information that supports that. And so as a creative director for a live game, it's all about the roadmap, but also for not a live game, it's about how do we get from here to ship. And so one, it's definitely working with the designers to develop the vision for the project. And so I have to think about what are our business goals, working with product, work with marketing and the brand team on what is our positioning in that market. And we'll do things like a SWOT analysis that shows us who are our competitors, what are our strengths and weaknesses compared to those competitors, and a couple other things I can't remember. And so we work with both brand and product to kind of come to conclusions there. And then also, what is it about the game that we're making that's going to be a hit in the market? So that's how I've been taught to do it. Some people design more from gut and from, I think, a more like an artful approach. Not that there's not any art to what I'm doing, but it's a very like structured process. And so it means I'm also looking at what are our players expecting in this genre? What has been done in this genre that are table stakes that we have to have? Where can we improve? And where do we want to innovate? And a lot of that has to do with psychology of players want to, typically a mass market will play a game that they're most familiar with or mechanics that they're familiar with. You don't have to really tutorialize that as much. And then, but there's things about this genre that's broken that we want to really innovate on. And there's things that we just want to blow it out of the water to be a #1 contender in the space. And so those are the types of things that I think about. And then what are the things that get us there? So it's like, right, working with designers on what's the core loops of our game. And so what are the systems that drive gameplay? And we talk about it in loops. You can equate it to an economy loop, but it can also just be a simple gameplay experience loop as well. And then what are the loops that live on top of that, or the onion that really drive players back to the core mechanics that they're doing, and also graduate them and scaffolds them to more complex play. A lot of psychology into that one. And then for me, it's about getting my team to think in that way, teaching them a lot of these core concepts, and then guiding the team into developing features and systems that support a lot of those concepts. And then talking to engineering, talking to production, can we build this? Usually we can't. And then coming to negotiations and trying to see what can we build. And also as a creative director, knowing that engineering thinks one way and so does production, and they might not be problem solving in the way that that might be conducive to putting something out. And so this definitely has happened on every project that I'm on. Most recently with a game like The Sims, right? It can only take so much simulation on a machine. It can only take so many bones for animation. And so doing something like animals was a really big challenge for the team. They had said no to it for a long time because of the complexity and just didn't feel like the game could handle it. But as designers, we try to work within that box. I'm like, okay, well, what if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? So we start to kind of understand, even though I'm not an engineer, I kind of have to understand what the system can take on. And then putting that on a roadmap. Okay, if we do this, this release, we might get something bigger this next release and build on top of that. And so like as a creative director, it's also thinking about those systems in a way that are scalable, right? Industry is not really building box products anymore. You ship and then you keep it going and you keep adding new content. So a lot of my job as a creative director is really to think about that roadmap and how do we get there from a technical standpoint. And then also talking with brand and marketing is what is our go-to-market plan and making sure that the story is connected. Like, have you ever played a game that's marketed one way and then you get to it and you're like, this was not what you sold me. Yeah. And so you like having to build a relationship with brand is really key because that, right, no one's trying to lie to their players. No one is trying to do that. But the conversations that happen in the workplace, if they're not collaborative or if people are working in silos, you might get a disconnect what's happening between marketing and game design. Or if a game designer is not respecting the business, right? Like, oh, you're just business people and blah, blah, blah. Then that communication can be stifled. Design's building something that likely isn't with the user in mind. And then marketing's trying to sell it and then it becomes this whole thing. So my job is to live in the middle of that and to make sure that we're having those conversations. It's a weird job.
There's a question that kind of blends. First, I think ending that with my job is to be in the middle of all that kind of reinforced what that job is, right? Sitting at the intersection of all of these desires. Yep. Okay.
Yes, please. That brings me to a good question. In comparison of EA and MAXIS to like smaller indie studios, solo developers, smaller studios, they're able to like really quickly very creative.
Yep.
And they can do that. They can do it the same way they want. It's not a huge thought about it. For again, their sexuality, ethnicity, race, very difficult topics. But I imagine EA and MAXIS is a kind of a big ship to steer when it comes to things like that. And Sims being a commercial product, how do you kind of reconcile that? You know, like some players kind of would love to see some of these things, but it's also part of the market. So give me thoughts on that.
I think it goes back to being optimistic and realistic. For the type of content that we make, it takes a very long time to package up an expansion. We're basically building a new game within our game. And so versus like an indie studio who might be in a different business model where maybe it's free to play or they're able to move more agilely because they don't have a lot of the checks in place that we have to have at a bigger company. And so the way that I deal with it, because I've been at both indie studios and big companies, I think a lot of where I got to today is because I've been able to work on R&D teams that move fast, and then also been on the other side with big companies like Zynga. I can kind of see some of the challenges and the muck that you have to get through, and people start to get like deterred by it. And so like, okay, we're just gonna go through this process and it might not be efficient, but we'll get through it. For someone like me, what's great about being in a leadership position, I can be like, hey, this is really inefficient. I don't want to do it this way anymore. But now I have to present on why I don't want to do it this way anymore. And I have to back it up with data and show that why it might be a better process for the team. So I have to evangelize constantly and I don't start by presenting the work. I shop it around with people. I start to kind of survey them to see what's working, not working. And then we'll come up with a more effective process together. One thing I've had to learn is people will come to the same conclusion. I can't give it to them because they have to live it themselves. And then I just guide them that way and help them stay on rails. And then we go through change management and roll a new process out to the team and it goes out faster. Smaller companies, you can just be like, we're going to change this and it's just going to happen. And it's right. Like someone can be like, it's my company. I'm going to do it this way. And so I think that's the challenge for a lot of people. Like big companies aren't for everyone because you have to navigate organizational development in a way where you almost have to have like a background in it.
So there's several versions of the same question that I'm going to ask to probably close us out today.
Okay.
So the original question was, how do game designers, and probably yourself in the creative director role, balance the gaming integrity while keeping the investors happy? It's kind of a C-suite question. For example, the discussion of NFTs. We see game companies really embracing the idea of NFTs, and the consumer seemingly not at all interested, to the point where you're giving me something that I never asked for, I never wanted. And then a couple folks asked about loot boxes, season passes, and what seems to be a tension. We talked about it last night a little bit.
Yeah.
This tension between how do you monetize and move the game forward, ostensibly to keep it alive and keep it working, versus the players are actively saying or passively saying, I do not want an NFT, I don't want to pay for my loot, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I'll just disclaimer, I am not a representative EA with this whole conversation. This is honest speaking for sure. So I think things like NFTs, I definitely don't want to see in the industry, especially how it's being used today. It's definitely a market right now that entrepreneurs are going after. And if you've been in that business, you can see a lot of the greed behind it. it is because it's something that eventually will likely become something in the market. I don't think it'll be called NFTs. I think it'll be called something else. NFTs remind me a lot of in-game currency, like, right, the world's becoming a video game, right? The metaverse and all of that, it has to have a currency to use across that universe. And so I see what was happening is it's the gold rush. All of the people trying to make a buck off of it are going to do it. They're going to screw it up for everyone else. And then hopefully someone's going to go in there and be a bit better and create something that is not toxic and is not trying to swindle people out of their money. And so I don't agree with NFTs, but I do see how that technology is something that we might see in a different form as a real life digital currency. I don't know if I answered the whole question.
No, you did, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think more than anything, I think it's on everybody's mind as we think about where the technologies are going and where they could probably be used. And it's a fair question. It's a fair answer. We can't ignore the technology exists. We'll probably use it in some different way, just like many other technologies that we embrace in gaming. We are at our time, so I want to thank our keynote speaker today. As a reminder for everybody online in particular, we're leaving the Zoom link live. So if you're on the Zoom link, you're welcome to stay. We're going to put up a bump for about 15 minutes and we'll start our next panel. Everybody online is welcome to converse, chat, hang out, exchange messages, and we'll see you all in a little bit. Thank you. Right. So I'm going to run to my office. Okay, and I'll just join in from there. I was going to ask you, did you want to log in?
All right. Welcome back, folks. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I think I can speak on behalf of the whole organizing team that we're very happy with things, the way things have been going so far, the quality of the talks and the interactions and all that's been going on in the chat and on Twitter as well. So thank you so much for your engagement. And we hope to continue that momentum through the rest of the afternoon and during the day tomorrow. My name is Kent Wilkinson. I'm one of the co-organizers of this conference, this symposium, and also the director of the Harris Institute for Hispanic and International Communication at Texas Tech. We're very happy to be involved in this great symposium. So welcome to the second panel, which is titled Gaming Industry 1. I'll be moderating, and we're going to have 3 presentations. And I think we'll just go in the order that we have listed on the program. And then I would ask the presenters to keep it to about 15 minutes maximum, so we have enough time for some Q&A. I think we've already seen that's a really valuable part of our being together virtually here. And so we will first hear a discussion of chains of relations for building new game history narratives, a case study of the operations of Taito Corp in Brazil with Letícia Perani and Melanie Swalwell.
Thank you so much, Kent. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from very early in the morning in Melbourne. So I've had 1 cup of coffee. I'll just kick off and then hand over to Letícia. So for some years, I've been interested in what the possibilities are for more connected histories, especially the potential that they offer for undermining some game history orthodoxies. And this is something that I've written about recently in, I don't know if you can see that, my latest anthology, Game History in the Local. A detail from one of my New Zealand informants suggested an intriguing connection between Taito New Zealand and Taito Brazil. He told me that he and a colleague rewrote the games Kong and Time Pilot from scratch to run on Galaxian hardware for the boss's son in Brazil. He said, even though we had the concepts in front of us, as in the games, there was still many months in writing those. And I found some information online on fan sites that seem to corroborate this, such as Augusto Campos's site. And so I approached Letícia to see if she was interested in collaborating to research this. And I'll hand over to her now.
Thank you, Melanie. When she first told me about this project in 5 years ago, we started researching because most game history effort in Brazil was led by the community of collectors and hobbyists. Professor Philippe talked about some of these things earlier today in his keynote. And so these collectors, these hobbyists, built their public history, their amateur history, driven by the desire of preserving their memories in the most correct way possible. And here we have the 2 books by Marcos Vinicius Garret Chiado, which were quoted by Professor Phoenix Stadsen earlier. And we have here another book, a book about Taito in Brazil, Taito Pinballs in Brazil, which was written by another hobbyist, André Martinez. So we have a lot of unreliable information. We have a lot of doubts about dates and operations and a lot of things. So as trying to solve these problems, we propose building some chains of relations. We call it in Portuguese, cadeias relacionais. It is the elaboration of chains of relations that come from the past to the present, as cross-referencing some objects of study from the exploration of their historical and technological, sociocultural, and economic contexts. And it is inspired by some theories of media history, like Butler's Gruiz's networks of remediation and Siegfried Zielinski's media and archaeology. So we build 3 steps for building these chains of relations on title operations in Brazil. First, we search on Brazilian and international forums and websites of arcades and pinball collectors, seeking for operation dates, addresses, names of the games produced in Brazil, technical information, among other data. And then we did searches in primary sources that are not a priority in game history research, like some online collections of Brazilian magazines and newspapers, like Jornal do Brasil, Folha de São Paulo, Estado de São Paulo, O Globo, all Brazilian newspapers, national newspapers. And we did search one coin-op trade magazine called Cashbox, who gave us a lot of important information. And this search was conducted by keywords such as Taito do Brasil, that was the name of the Brazilian subsidiary of Taito, Michael Kogan, who was the founder of Taito Corporation, Abraham Kogan, who was the son of Michael Kogan, and he was the president of Taito Brazil, in addition to some names of arcades machines produced by Taito Corporation Brazil. And then we, all this information that we obtained from forums and collectors' websites was checked with files obtained in those magazines, newspapers, public records. And so we produced some cross-references on this information. Well, it's very complicated to produce this kind of cross-reference research. It takes a long time. We've been conducting this particular research since 2017. And so we have some facts here that we like to call likely or unlikely facts that we are verifying and checking. We got some answers already, and other things we still have to look after. So a fact that was pointed by us by collectors of Taito in Brazil. Taito started his operations as a distributor of amusement machines, not only pinballs, but all kinds of amusement machines like jukebox and stuff. And it's very likely, although we have some doubts about the data of establishment of the Taito subsidiary in Brazil. We don't know yet it's 1968 or 1972. This is something that we discussed earlier with Professor Phoenix Stadson at his keynote. Some pinballs and arcades produced by Taito were unlicensed clones. This is likely due to the Brazilian reserve market that was imposed by the Brazilian dictatorship until the 90s. But parent company, the Taito Corporation, had a lot of official distribution deals with a lot of manufacturers, including SEGA. That is our next topic with Dr. Mariana Amaro and Dr. Suely Fragoso. And so
we don't know. It's very likely because we have here we have the pictures from Taito pinball called Critério 75 from Taito, Brazil. And to your left, we have the same machine, Critério, made by a Spanish company called Resell. And but Taito Brazil was the official distributor for Resell. So we don't know if this is just a clone, if this was licensed. We still don't know. We have to look after this information. So we think it's likely to say that most of the Taito production in Brazil was clones, but we don't know yet if this was the reality for all the production of Taito in Brazil. This is something that Melanie earlier in our presentation, that Taito New Zealand programmed some EEPROMs, which was smuggled to Brazil to be used in those machines assembled by Taito do Brazil. And we are still looking for evidences of these operations. Only oral evidence are yet available, so we have to look. We are looking into this now. And that Taito of Brazil exported their machines to Japan and other Latin American countries. We find this very unlikely. Have some Brazilian news reports available on this, but some evidence that we found in international coin-op trade magazines indicate that these exports were actually from Taito America, the American subsidiary, and not the Brazilian subsidiary. We have here some excerpt from Folha de São Paulo in 1976, saying that some Taito pinballs were being exported to Japan. And here at the right, we have some excerpt from Cashbox saying the opposite, that Taito America used to distribute these machines to North America and South America. So we think building these chains of relations, especially with the use of non-gaming newspapers and magazines, can be feasible to building a non-traditional historiography called narrative in the field of game studies, when the focus of the researchers are in the industrial operations of pioneers such as Taito, or when there is a lack of reliable information that may be already cross-referenced by game historian, as is the case of games in Brazil. So we'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to thank you, thanks Melanie for this opportunity of researching with her. And we are open to all your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was doing a little organizing stuff in the background. Let's continue on with our second presentation. I would try the Portuguese, but I don't want to offend any Brazilian ears. Typical Latin American appropriations of video games and the success of SEGA in Brazil by Mariana Amaro and Suely Fragoso. So please take it away.
Okay. Today I will share the presentation here, right?
Mariana is going to share the presentation. I'm going to stop to her because she has the best part of the presentation. She has all the examples and all the nice things that she's going to present, and I have the boring part. So I will start, and very soon you'll be rid of me.
Sorry, if you can like put the volume a little up. The volume is a little, yeah, your phone. I think the volume is not very good. I will play back. Yeah, you have to talk a little more, like song, a little song, something like that.
Is it better now?
No, not a little.
Near me because I can't get it. Oh God.
Yeah,
Now we have a problem. Hold on.
yeah, and they're already ringing you. So no, just kidding. I know that's not okay.
Now we have a problem. Is it working now?
Okay, it's a little bit like, no, it's a low, but maybe if you all stay quiet,
No, I don't know.
we can like listen to you.
2 minutes ago, but I will try to speak like a
Yes.
lecture. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm in a very crowded room.
Okay. Okay.
Is it better? Okay. So starting the presentation, I will go to the context in which our presentation, the subject of our presentation happens, and then I will give some of the theoretical background very fast, as I said, and then I'll pass to Mariana, who has the best part. So Mariana, the first slide, please. And then you will see here the cultural background or the context, and everything I'm going to say happens during the time in which we had this incredibly protectionist policies in force in Brazil. They started during the military dictatorship, and I cannot resist to be in Texas as I am right now and not thanking the US for the military dictatorship, so I would do it. And that was a very difficult time in Brazil. And I'm talking about this time because I remember it, and Mariana is from the next generation, so she won't remember that. She'll have a much better approach to the whole question, much happier. But from in this time, what we had was a very protectionist law that had, amazingly enough, a very good intention of getting the Brazilian industry boosted and giving it a good incentive. But what happened is the idea was, oh, we are going to get this industry going because nobody can get anything from abroad, and therefore our entrepreneurs are going to go and make it beautiful new things and invent new things and so on. And what our entrepreneurs did, I think Mariana has the next slide, what our entrepreneurs did was basically getting in touch with the people from abroad and making joint agreements and publishing what was a copy, but it wasn't a piracy or an illegal clone. It was all very legal in our country and abroad, and it was paying licenses. However, because it was something that was produced in Brazil, in some degree, it always changed something. Something was changed, even if it was just translated. So we went to these categories of appropriation that are mentioned from Pisani and Weber in an old paper from 2007, and they call it typically Latin American modes of appropriation. And they mention these three types of appropriation. To those, we added one more subtle before Baroque infiltration that would be similar to the in-betweenness that has been mentioned this morning. And we put a fourth one as well, because with cannibalism, Mariana is going to give the examples to situate you. I'm not going to explain one by one because it would be boring. Cannibalism, we took a bit further because Pisani and Weber mentioned cultural anthropophagy, but we don't think they go far enough with it. And we want to recover this idea of the Brazilian natives, in which when they ate this bishop, they really ate this bishop, they cooked him and ate him. It was not disrespect or anything. What they were doing is trying to appropriate, literally, to metabolize everything he knew and his power. So it was kind of, it was, of course, something bad that they were doing to the other person, but there was a respect as well. They would never do that to someone they didn't consider intelligent and powerful. because that would be metabolized to them. So you will see in the examples that there is a point in which the cannibalism, the cannibalistic tendency becomes a cultural anthropophagy of the same type of we go get the best of you and metabolize, not of you, I hope. So I'll pass to Mariana now with the examples that, as I said, are much nicer.
So I want to start to saying that when we think about Brazilian market and industry, the first thing that we read and we see in documentary is about the clones and about the piracy and all. And looks like Brazilians only can get the games or could get games by this way. This is the only way that we can get it, and there is not other way. But truly, we have in this, I think, 30 years that we have like been and trying to playing, we have to be creative. We took a lot of different forms from the video game rental stores where we went to rental the games or to play there, right? And we didn't have any food there or coffee because, you know, we are most of kids just playing in like really tiny TVs with the time schedule and a little money. And we have like to take some gambiarra or some technical appropriations with a lot of different gadgets just to make, if it was the case, the console that we have bought in US to function in our PAL TVs or whatever we have in the time, or just buy some adapters to put the cartridge in our video games. So, and also, of course, using a lot of walkthroughs in Portuguese, because the most of us doesn't understand English at that time. And we have a little problem because Nintendo, Brazilian magazines, video game magazines, were always like trying to see if Nintendo was really officially coming to Brazil, and it never came. So it started to make some like articles, news articles, parodying the fact that Mario was never coming to us. And it said like, oh, we lost Mario, Mario is missing, Mario is not here, and all in Portuguese, and putting Mario in different places of Rio de Janeiro as he was, oh, he lost himself coming here. So, right? And if you ever see the Brazilian meme, come to Brazil, the time already was like, why don't you come to me? Why don't you love us? But we have another company, the company that really ruled Brazil in the scenario of games. We have SEGA. Instead of the agreements with Nintendo, which was very preoccupied with the piracy and was dealing, the time Brazilians was dealing with the North American Nintendo, Tectoy thinking, I will not try to do to work out with North Americans or Europeans. I will knock it out I will knock on the door of the SEGA in Japanese. So they went there and they start to do the negotiations. SEGA try out Tectoy with a little pistol, mechanical pistol, electric pistol, a toy, and Tectoy sell it really well. So they said, maybe we can take this old video game that doesn't sell well in US and it was kind of okay in Europe, and we can put it in this, I don't know, this foreign market that nobody knows and is full of pirates, and let's see what happens. It was because the original Master System was released in Japan in 1986, but it came to Brazil in 1989. And as Philippe already explained to you, it was not allowed to like just import video games from or other informatical stuff from foreign countries, but you can like build it all here. So Tectoy started to build and sign it and produce the Master System in Brazilian national territory, and it was like a success. And how it went so well, they said, okay, now we have like this very new video game, and it's only 2 years old, so it's great. So we can like release in the market, and it will like have different audience from the master system. The system will be like more accessible way, like for young children or people that doesn't have so much money, and Mega Drive or Genesis, as you know, will be like for top buyers, for like newcomers to like technology, to kids who can like be like luxury video game console. Looks like something that Apple and iPhone are doing right now, you know? You have like the cheap one and like the big, the great one. So Nintendo and Sega and Tectoy already doing that in the 90s. And surprisingly, even though we always listen about Famiclones and piracy and something like that, Sega was really trying in Brazilian market in industry. If you see the sales report from toys in Brazil in the 90s, Tectoy has the share of 75%. So this is copies of articles from magazines, news magazines in Brazil, that say like the triumph of a plaything and the stars that rise. So it can show me that Tectoy was doing really well, even though the games are very expensive, but they had a way to put these expensive games in Brazilian house. They start to do like I don't know how to say this in English. Help me, Philippe. How you can say crediário? I don't know how to say that. You can like pay installment. Yes. So they give a special, Tectoy was founding a special installment to any Brazilian go to the I don't know, like mega stores have here, and buy your video game in like very few payments by month. I know that because I had my first master system because of this kind of thing. So my family was make their first like, how can I say, dívida, their first like being in the doubt with the bank because of me. So yes, this is to be Brazilian Latin American, truly. And now I will just show you some of the examples with the categories that Philippe explained to you. So the first one, Baroque importation. When video games came to Brazil, do you have to think that Atari was here first? Well, it's okay, not very well, but Atari was still here. So because the timeline in how the video game consoles come to Brazil and the rest of the world is kind of different. Everything here was kind of late going, so we didn't really have like the great breakthrough that all world has, like Atari fall, the video game is something that is a fad, it will not happen again, and then Nintendo came. No, Brazil, like, okay, Atari's here, is going here. If you ever read Emanuel Ferreira's work, and Pazzi also, Professor André Pazzi, they'll show you that we have like a kind of courtesy in Atari, and Polyvox was here, and almost very close to when Tectoy came and took the master system and bring it to Brazil. So, but we have a problem. Kids and people, Brazilian people at that time, didn't know some of genres that were very popular in Japan, like RPGs. So they start to, and other genres like adventure games too. So they start to do like, they start to franchise magazines to like teach the players how to play games, like what was the news games, and also to understand, to make the Brazilian kids and Brazilian players to understand genres like RPG. So they like have a very good like article magazine in the first editions of an old Brazilian magazine game called Video Game, talking about, explaining to the Brazilian player what is an RPG and why it has so many texts in English. So why it's so hard. Think about that, they say, aha, but we have to do something. So we're going to do an illustrate dictionary of Japanese, English, and Portuguese, but the people could like play the games they cannot understand because most of Brazilians didn't understand English. I didn't understand English at that time, but to be truly, I even cannot read when I had my master's system. I was like 3 years old, so I cannot even read. I was illiterate in that time. But we have like this dictionary, and I don't know if you can read in Portuguese, but there's just a really like happy and positive text. And okay, now you have the tool. Congratulations, you have just won a super dictionary, trilingual Japanese, English, and Portuguese. Then can help you to play the games you ever dream. So you have like I think it's 20 pages with a lot of words like reset, what is hit point, what is start, what is things like very basic so people can like only play the game. You see, you cannot really understand the narrative of a game, but you can like moving around with it. And the Japanese in katakana, hiragana, it's also more simple, but the same way. But you see, you still have a problem. Kids don't understand some of the how to play the game, but they have the literacy to play it. So they start to Tectoy open like a section, a Q&A section to people send like mail asking questions when they are stuck in the game. But of course, they took a long time to answer it. So the kids were like, what are we going to do? They have idea. They start to call Tectoy. And they start to call to the marketing center Tectoy because it was the number that was in the game when they bought it. So Tectoy just looked at Alexandre Pagano, who worked at the marketing and answered the letters, and he started to answer the kids and say, okay, what are you doing now? And they start to like really tutoring these kids in how to play. And in this, he starts to like really doing like a lot of maps and translate the games. And he starts the hotline. They mounted a team with another employees, and they start to really answer to this kid. And when they start to listen to these kids, they also start to pick up the feedback of what these kids what's the most troubled games, what is the most popular games, and what is the cartoons that these kids like to watch. And why this is important? Because they think, okay, we have this RPG from SEGA, but we have a problem. Most of our kids cannot understand English, not even the adults. So maybe we have like all this plan, all these maps here, and I almost translate everything when I was playing, trying to teach people. Maybe we can really translate this game, the Fantasy Star. And if you launch a Brazilian game that was in Brazilian Portuguese, maybe it will sell well, and we can like do the RPG genre really works in Brazil. And they did it. But there was a problem. SEGA didn't send the game and all the software and everything. They just send the text without any pictures. They have to play and see the pictures. And they effectively did the translation without looking the images at the same time. And they have a little problem. Japanese has like fewer letters than English. Do you know that, right? So when they do the Japanese translation to English, they already like cut up some words. But if you have to take these cut up words of English and then put it in Portuguese, that was the case because Alexandre Pagano only know English. You have like almost all their text. So like have very little space to put our Portuguese words, and Portuguese is very more long than English in all the time. So we have here the version in Portuguese, the beginning of Phantasy Star, and the history, the narrative. And the narrative is like very direct and very like cut short in Portuguese. It's, oh my God, listen, conducting our world. I tried to find out her plans, but I cannot do anything alone. I heard about a man who is so fast and cannot translate so fast for you. I already translate my thoughts, so I cannot translate another thing. But they really go really direct in this text. And then you see the English one, they're not so directed. I will just show you again. In this I can translate to you. And there's some subtle difference in the localization that changed the game's tone completely. Here you can see that I don't know, I'm not saying that Alexandre Pagano thinks about that, but I think that maybe they want to be more direct about like giving orders to the Brazilian player. They say, when did you talk about with this NPC? He say to you, no, we put there, I'm so sorry. They, just a minute. I don't know why they do that to me. Okay, I'm sorry. I will just send up. But it's sometimes in Portuguese, you say you have to take a lamp to go to the basement. You cannot go there. And in English, it's more like, oh, I heard that maybe it's good to have a lamp if you go to somewhere that is dark. So I think Brazilian Portuguese is more like, okay, you have the basement, you have to really get something to explore there. Like really like instructional in that. And we have like realization. Okay, so the first one was like localization and change of a narrative about a game was already there, or more in the kind of the narrative and the technical things of letters. In the creolization, we have a total different way of seeing games in Brazil. I will try. Okay, I promise Suely that will not take so much time to talk about Monica, but Monica is like very important if you are from my generation in Brazil. If you are from Latin America, Brazilian Latin America, and you are like around 30, Monica was the comic that teach you to read. So this is very important. So, and it's like so big. She has like this gang, his friends, and it's very big. And the most popular, I can tell you without any doubt, is the most popular Brazilian character, a fictional character for kids and youngsters. And very capitalist too, because they have a lot of products, because like it's our Disney world. And in the cultural kind of context, I can say that Monica is in the same place as for Brazilians, as Quinos Mafalda, as Astro Boy for Osamu Tezuka, and maybe this little duck over there. And we have like this. This is the best thing in the world. I was saying that because Master System Rosa or Master System Girl, as was like sold, right, was like my dream, the video game that was I dreamed about it. That was the video game that I made my family start to get things checks from the bank about. This is the thing that this is amazing, because they have the two. This is a game. This is a top video game launched in the time, so it was not something like not very good or like downgraded for girls. No, it was very good. It was the top product in the time. They had like not one but two games inside, and one of them is Sonic, and one of them Monica. It was the most popular games that we can have. Monica was not only for girls. I have to say that Monica was for boys and girls, and I don't know, everyone. My mom really loved Monica, and this was like not happy to have like Sonic Monica. It also didn't have wires, so it's like Wi-Fi. It's not Wi-Fi, it's antenna, but it was very good. And also I think it's the first streaming video game on the Galaxy, because if you play it with this antenna, all your neighbors, the antenna is so strong that all your neighbors, if you put the right channel, they can see what you're playing. So it was nice, it was great. And you have like Monica and Sonic together, which was so great. And this was the first time of Brazilian creolization, when we start to take two things and putting them together and making ours. I will just show you this thing really fast. They say, oh, Mariana, but this is your experience, okay? Yes, it is. And you are one American, Latin American girl, so maybe most of them or the others are playing only clones. Yes, I'm not saying that. but there's a big, and I will show you, I will make proof of it, of a lot of girls that play and now research and work with games in Brazil. They started with Monica and Master System. I will, don't do. He's talking about Monica. You can, you listen? No. Are you listening? No, you're not listening. No, but you need to listen this. Just this. The rest I don't care. But you really, really read here. I will share sound with you. Okay? I will.
Mônica. Eu queria muito. Eu ia na Blockbuster e eu ficava vendo as pessoas jogarem Turma da Mônica e eu chorava. É porque eu era muito fã da Turma da Mônica. Foi como eu aprendi a ler, né?
So this girl, she said then when she went to Blockbuster, video game rental, she was like really crying because she really wanted to play Monica, because she really liked Monica, because she learned to read with Monica. Who is this girl? This girl is Amora Bethany. She is a designer of Celeste. So just you know, I'm not saying that I'm like exception. I'm saying that Monica was really in Master System. Rosa, not pink, Rosa was very important for us too. And we have like 3 different games from Monica, who also, for you people who are not Brazilian, can be called Wonder Boy games. I don't know, but for Brazilians, all Monica games. Because we just took the Monica and the sprite of Wonder Boy, and he put it in put a sprite of Monica inside a Wonder Game Boy. I will just, now I will share my sound, or you're going to be crazy. And of course, they put in all the Portuguese localization, and they have to change the narrative a little bit more because Monica was not in a world that have monsters and things like that. So they just said, I will just say that Monica was put it up in a video game world because she was playing too much and the video game just sucked her, and now she has to save these video game persons and to be again to come back to our world, because Monica lives in our world. Oh, and I know I didn't and I don't have time to talk a lot about Monica with you. I could, but I will not do that. But Monica has like superpower, super strong, like Superman. But she only used like her stuffed blue bunny to beat persons. And the creator of her creator, Marisa de Souza, was very, very clear that he only would make a Monica game if she didn't use a sword, because Monica would never use a sword. So Monica, they put in the sword, they picked the bunny and put in the sword in her hand. So she, instead of using the sword of ornament, she used a bunny. And this is not the only Monica games. The other games that really change everything is Monica. I'll say that. Turma da Mônica ao Resgate, where they pick up the same line in this narrative, original narrative. Wonder Boy is like cursed by the dragon, and he like start to change forms. They cannot come back to the original form, the human form, but they could not do that to Monica. It would not make sense. So they just tell the Brazilian players that Monica was kidnapped, and now we are playing with her friends, and they're trying to save her. And so they change completely the narrative, and now you are like trying to save yourself, not like come back to the original.
Mari Amaro, if you could finish up, we've got one more
Yes.
presentation to go.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm so sorry. And this is just, I was just looking to you, Chapolin and everything. I'm sorry, when I start to talk about Monica, I cannot stop. Actually, already had said to me, don't talk about Monica. And then have cannibalism. Because of the hotline, we start to have like programs of TV, Brazilians biggest broadcast channel about video games, about rules, and they start to really make a Brazilian game. And they pick up an American character, Pica-Pau, and start to do a video game in Brazil, because it was very, very, very famous in Brazil. Pica-Pau was like the most popular cartoon in this broadcasting, and they have the ratings because they are doing the show there. So they just pick up Pica-Pau and change everything about that, make Pica-Pau American and put it almost in the Brazilian way and everything. So I just ended that the consideration that Baroque is a localization from this kind of official Brazilianist adaptation of games. Creolization would be the modded games. Cannibalism would be like this kind of original game with a character that already existed. And the next chapter, our research, we are thinking about how Microsoft come here, like officially, and with Xbox 360 and live service come to Brazil and changing everything. And that's all, folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that was a really good cue to put out a suggestion there that this be the first of a continuing series of symposia that we do. And we'd like to, encourage our colleagues from around the world to consider taking that on and doing the next phase, because obviously there's a lot more to talk about than we even have time to over a couple of days. So let's make that part of the discussion. I know tomorrow, toward the end, we would like to have sort of a debrief and a discussion about where we move from here. And so be thinking about it, this afternoon, this evening, and how we might move on to the next phase of this gathering. So thank you very much. I agree with the comments that we could listen for a couple of hours, and that it's very visually rich and culturally rich. So that's been the case of many of these. We'd like to turn now to our final presentation of this second panel, still doing what Nintendon't, the saga of the SEGA Master System in Brazil. So thanks very much for that trava-linguas there, guys. I think I got through it. Okay. And this is Philippe de Chauveau and Nick Bowman from here at Texas Tech. So take it away, guys.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, everyone, that we have to cut short their presentation. Sorry you have to listen to ours now. Really sorry. But I guarantee you that ours is it's a similar topic. We're telling the same story through a different kind of lens here, but you'll see a lot of similarities. And actually what Mariana and Swalwell covered is gonna come up in ours a lot. So it's kind of helping contextualize both presentations, I think. So I'm gonna pull it up here right now. Let me go to presenting mode. I will not be doing that before I share my screen. Here we go, share. And hopefully can you see the presentation? Okay. So as Dr. Wilkinson said, our presentation is called Still Doing What Nintendon't, the saga of the SEGA Master System in Brazil. When I wrote that title, I didn't realize it was going to be very hard to say out loud, but I still like the alliteration. And this is a paper by Dr. Bowman and I here at Texas Tech University. And it's really excited to be a part of this, seeing a lot of Brazilian names in the Zoom chat and seeing some people in person too, some new faces and also some faces I know. So really happy to be a part of this. So the goal of our paper here in this presentation is to look at, so the SEGA Master System is the oldest console still in production. So as Mariana and Swalwell talked about, it started in 1986 in Japan, got to Brazil in '89, and Tectoy, the company that was just talked about, is still making new Master Systems. So you can go to Brazil right now and buy a new Master System out of the box. So it's 30 years old, basically 25 years old. So we're going to talk a little bit about like how that happened, how SEGA and Master System shaped Brazilian gaming culture a little bit. And before we get into that, we're going to cover a little bit of the background that was kind of already covered in the previous presentation. So we're going to be jumping around here a little bit. But essentially, Brazilian video gaming, Brazil, and as my fellow Brazilians here on the chat can attest, it is a big market, right? People in Brazil love video games, and they have for a while. It is the 5th largest gaming population. Brazilians game for an average of 1 hour and 17 a day, which is about the same as the US, which is a top 2 gaming population. It is considered a lucrative market. We have all the major players, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, even though Nintendo is on and off, they're there now. And home console sales have been rising in Brazil since 2015. So it's a big market for video games. But why SEGA? Why do Brazilian people love SEGA? And of course, we saw some of this with the previous presentation, but it's a few things. So it's interesting to think about that SEGA hasn't made an original console since 1998 with the Dreamcast. A company that hasn't made an original console since 1998 was selling about 150,000 consoles in Brazil, new consoles, per year until 2012, which is the most recent data we have. How does that happen? Well, people love the Master System, and the Master System loves them back. It was a perfect storm, right? There was a home console boom in the 80s around the world. SEGA arrived in Brazil early with a partnership with Tectoy, and which helped them circumvent like local taxes and stuff like that, that helped them really establish the Brazilian gaming market. So if we look at the 1980s, we look at the release of the NES and its, SEGA competitor, the Master System. So we look at the rebirth of home consoles that started with the Atari, kind of died down a little bit in the arcade age, and it came back with these two consoles. The problem for SEGA was that Nintendo controlled 90% of Japanese and North American markets. These were the two biggest gaming markets still are. And not only did their hardware sell better, they also had exclusive gaming contracts or contracts with game makers. So their hardware sold better, they had more games. So it was hard for SEGA to break into those markets. So, which you can see here. So Japan. Nintendo controlled Japan and the US with Ryu and Ken. So SEGA had to go to Europe, where Vega is from, and also Brazil, where Blanca is from. He's a very accurate representation of Brazilians. So as SEGA turned to these markets, they were the first to get there. There's a few reasons which we saw in the previous presentation again, but the Brazilian market was volatile and expensive at the time, and a few things come into this, but basically is at the end of a 3-4 decade dictatorship that we were coming out of, and we're like, you know what? We're going to accelerate the economy. We're going to get moving. We're going to put the protectionist policies that Swilly said. They had good intentions. They wanted Brazilian industry to grow. So what they did is they put policies in, they put high import taxes, sometimes over 100% the price of the product, so that we would prefer to buy local products. However, Brazilian infrastructure wasn't kind of ready for this sort of responsibility. So what happened is that foreign tech was still desired. It was just incredibly expensive. So look at it a little more like this. And if you are a person that didn't grow up playing Sonic like me, this happens to you a lot. I lose a lot of rings, I'm sorry. So just an example of prices at the time. And if you see here the price in Brazil with the different notations, that those aren't typos. The Brazilian currency changed 6 to 8 times between 1980 and 1994. So it's kind of hard to keep track. But the Master System, when it got to Brazil, it cost 1,500 cruzados novos, which at the time is about $630. At the same time, the Master System in the US was $200. And you can see this pattern goes on, right? We have different currencies here, but every time the consoles are about at least 2 times more expensive in Brazil than everywhere else. And this still happens today. So Mariana was talking about iPhones. So an iPhone in the US is $700 or $1,000, the newest one. In Brazil, that should translate if we're doing like a direct comparison to 3,500 reais or 5,000 reais, but in fact, they cost more like 10,000, right? So you can see how the taxes still really impact the tech industry in Brazil. So how did SEGA get around this? Well, like we talked about, Tectoy, the incredibly 90s logo company. They sought out SEGA, and their first ever product was the Zillion light gun, which was a gun that came with the Zillion game for the SEGA Master System. And they did it pretty well. And Tectoy, this was kind of a groundbreaking thing for several reasons beyond like circumventing the taxes, but because Tectoy was established in 1987. So this was a relatively unknown company. You had companies like Gradiente they were much larger non-electronic companies that were trying to do stuff like this, and they didn't do it as well for some reason that we'll get into here in the next slides. But Tectoy helped establish SEGA as the go-to choice for Brazilian gamers in the early 90s. Even people go into debt to buy Mega Drives and Master Systems. So how are they so successful? There's a few steps, right? So first of all, their marketing campaigns were phenomenal. And SEGA was known for having aggressive marketing elsewhere as well. So this is where the Nintendon't campaigns comes from. So they were telling people like, hey, we're the cool console. We have all these games that Nintendo doesn't have. The Genesis is way more powerful than the Super NES, et cetera, et cetera. In Brazil, we had a similar sort of campaign. This is the cooler game system. But it was mostly marketed as, this is the Brazilian console. Of course, it's made in Japan, but we make it here. We're Tectoy, we make it in Brazil, and they provide exclusive support. As was talked about, they had the Master System hotline where people could call and be like, hey, I'm stuck on this level, help me. Or my Master System is bugging out, how do I fix it? And people would pick up. And that was incredibly popular for the first few years until they started charging for it. And then it kind of died out, but it was still a really important step there. And the Master Dicas, which was the TV program that would show people hints on how to beat games. So for example, I have a video here that we can play later, which is just a guy in those incredibly 90s living room explaining to people, how do you get to continue after dying in Golden Axe? So if you die in Golden Axe, you get game over. But if you press a sequence of buttons, you can get a single continue that allows you to keep going in the game. And they basically tell you about that in the way that, you know, you couldn't access in manuals because they were in English or the information wasn't in there. So it was a really good marketing, not ploy, but a really good marketing tool. And it was also, in recent years, they have shifted. What they've done really well, Tectoy, is that they've shifted the marketing from, you know, they can no longer say that the Master System is the cool console when you have like PS4s and PS5s out there. It's a different kind of cool, right? But what they talk about is that it's branded as an entry-level console. So if you're trying to just get a video game to have fun and not be serious about it, why would I spend like $800 on a PS5 if I could buy a Master System with 130 games for 50, right? So that's kind of how they've shifted around. So they've done that really well. They also had some software, as we have seen from the previous presentation. So they started by the Baroquization of software, translating stuff, translating Phantasy Star, one of the first translations to hit Brazil. They started then creolization, where they changed the sprites of Wonder Boy to Turma da Mônica, or Monica's Gang for my Portuguese challenge friends. And then they went with the cannibalization or cannibalism, where they created their own software. So Férias Frustradas do Pica-Pau Amarelo. Pica-Pau is a woodpecker who's kind of like Bugs Bunny. He's a rascal, but he's kind of funny, so you still kind of root for him. But sometimes you don't. He divides opinion, at least that's how I feel. But people, like, he's a really big property in Brazil, just like how Bugs Bunny is in the US. So they made some games with just Brazilian properties made in Portuguese for Brazilians. And this, of course, was a big success because it's games made by Brazilians for Brazilians, something that other game companies did not do. And Tectoy was also given, this is some to Sega's credit, also given a lot of leeway with the consoles. So there are several different iterations of the Master System in Brazil. Of course, it's been alive for like 23 years or whatever. So of course they had the first one in 1989, but then they started releasing different versions of it. So this is the Master System 3 collection, which is a compact version of it. And you can see the Tectoy logo here at the bottom right. And then you have the Master System Compact, which came with games in it. And you see the Sonic branding there. Again, this is a Tectoy exclusive. The Master System Super Compact, and the Master System Rosa or Pink, which Mariana talked about, was her dream of her childhood, which was marketed at girls and came with Turma da Mônica games in it. And then they had this thing that I think is the most incredible thing I've ever seen, and I wish I had this. It's a controller, but the controller connects to a TV or a monitor via HDMI or AV ports, and the controller itself has 30 games in it. So you just plug the controller to a monitor and play. Like, that's incredible. I wish I knew that. I wish I had.
Phil, that would have been easier than whatever we had to do to get my TV to work.
True. Yes. So what Dr. Bowman is talking about is I brought for him the Master System Evolution, which is this one down here, the Sonic version from 2011, which has 130 games, which you have to connect it to a PAL connector, and you have to do a bunch of gambiarras to get it to work. And I suspect that the controller would have just plugged into his TV and we would have been ready to go. But in my defense, I didn't know it existed, or else I would have already bought it for myself. So Sega had all the success, right? They had good marketing, great software additions, and great hardware additions. Nintendo, on the other hand, was floundering. They failed at first, right? So they tried to enter the market in 1993 officially, but by that point, the Sega Tectoy relationship was already dominating the market. Everyone wanted Sonic, no one cared about Mario. And NES clones, both official and non-official, were preferred over the official, like a Super Nintendo hardware. So you can see here on the right, that's a Phantom System by Gradiente, which is another Brazilian toy maker, or Brazilian electronics maker. But as you can see, it's got a lot more in common with the Master System and the Genesis and the Mega Drive, excuse me, than it does with the NES and Nintendo consoles. Like look at the shape of the controllers, look at the shape of the gun. The Phantom system is just, it just plays NES games, but it wasn't supported by Nintendo at all. And Brazilian gamers, they knew this. They didn't want Nintendo to break into their market because we like Sega, we love Sonic. So that shaped the Brazilian gaming culture and still does. So the demand in video games in Brazil is high. Part of it is thanks to Sega because of their early entry, their partnership with Tectoy, and they still shape Brazilian gaming. So they provided an affordable way to game by circumventing the taxes. They had exclusive support that made you feel like you were a wanted market, and they still make master systems. Like this is a picture that I took at the Tectoy store in Rio de Janeiro. Like this is a picture, I went to the store, there's a tiny store inside an Extra supermarket, and they sell solely Tectoy products, including the master system. So if you want to play a new master system, you know where to go now. But if you can't afford to go to Brazil, you don't have the time because it's very expensive and it's time commitment. You could also just go to Dr. Bowman's house where the CRT is there with some Sonic in Portuguese and you can go check it out. But so that's what we had for today. If you want to talk to if you want to talk more to us about this, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, talk to Dr. Bowman. You can email us, you can chat us, whatever. We love to talk about this stuff. If you can't tell, and I really appreciate everyone being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, y'all.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate all three of the presentations, and there are already a couple of questions. Rather than reading them, I think I will point you to the questions in the chat by Phil. The first one is for Letícia and Melanie, and the second one is for Mariana and Suely. So if you would just take a look at those, and we'll take those in order. First, Letícia and Melanie, and then the second one.
I saw the question, Phil, it was a while back, saying, have we gotten in touch with those directly or indirectly involved, identified or attempted to contact any of the people involved with Taito Brazil and or other scholars, collectors, curators working with Taito Brazil? I might let Letícia speak to what she's done, but I will say Maria Garda, who is a Spanish speaker, was working with me for a number of months on this, reaching out to lots of collectors in Latin America and trying to follow leads, and also scouring message boards to ask if anybody had any knowledge about Taito Brazil boards from arcade machines in other parts of Latin America. We haven't managed to get a satisfactory, any proof that the Taito boards were exported or machines were exported to other countries. We would love it if anybody knows anybody and can help us. Please put us in touch with your networks, or help us disprove this if you know that people know. We did find I think a reference to when the company was wound down, machines being taken to a farm and burned, like the excess stock. I'll throw to you, Letícia.
Thank you, Dr. Phoenix Stadsen, for your question. And it's been really difficult to reach to local collectors, and especially to people who work at Taito Brazil. And I was able to locate some of the key people of Taito in Brazil and to reach them by Facebook, but they gave me their emails, and and then I would identify myself as a researcher, as an academic, and then I got no answers from them. So we don't know why they are so reluctant to talk with us. And now with the pandemic, things are very difficult, but we're still trying to reach these people. I'm Facebook friends with Marcos Garret,
who was the author of those books about Brazilian game history. But, well, let's just say that I didn't had a good experience with him. So a lot of stuff, well, let's just say that a lot of stuff here in Brazil is hard. When we're talking about academics and this interaction between academics and collectors, sometimes things can be hard. I don't know. I'm trying to say things without saying. I don't know if, if you understand that.
Perhaps I can add that in previous research on arcade history in New Zealand, I've also found it really difficult to get people to talk. Some people, you know, it was a very dodgy business. It was a cash business.
Yeah.
And that's probably, you know, there's a lot that people don't want to talk about for good reason.
Yeah. A lot of shading things happen.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? I'm wondering if some of that, do you get the sense that some of that could be perceptions of games as being like frivolous or playful, or like in some cultures we see moral panics around games, or in other cultures games are written off as, oh, that's not important, why are you bothering me about this? Do you get a sense that that could be going on as well?
Well, during the Brazilian dictatorship, arcades were forbidden for minors and seen as places for vice. So it helps. It's kind of have a marginal feeling here in Brazil. Arcades are not good places to be. So I think there's a lot of this prejudice against games in Brazil.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to Phil's second question for Mariana and Swalwell.
Thank you. For Mariana and Swalwell, I just wondered how you trace the line between Tech Toy's practices of localization and current localization practices, because it's so complex what goes on today with localization, monetary localization, cultural localization in Brazil. So I just wonder, do you see it as connected, or is it just an entirely different world now?
I think I got to fix my microphone, so I hope I'm not gonna shout to anyone. I'll try to skip to speak in a normal tone of voice now. I have a doctorate student who is studying exactly free fire and localization, and he's friends with Thiago Falcão, so I'm not absolutely certain how Falcão and yours approach is different from my student. But from what my student's doing, you know, just getting from his work, I don't work with Free Fire, I'm just supervising him. I don't play Free Fire. There is no change in the game itself. Free Fire is played in Brazil as it's played somewhere else. Perhaps there could be a translation of some stuff to Portuguese, but there won't be this real localization of getting and making a character here and so on. This student of mine, for example, he has a paper about how one character was created, one skin was created once for LOL with a Brazilian folklore character. So that would be a beginning of, you know, would be the first step towards a monetization of LOL, for example, but it didn't go on. But with Free Fire, I don't think, however, my student is getting a lot of other types of localization in the sense of, but that is the type of appropriation that doesn't change the game itself. It's about the way we play the game. It's like as if we had bought at the time of SEGA, for example. We bought the game, we were playing Sonic, but we were playing Sonic and doing something different because our circumstances were different. So I think there's a big difference there into localizing because you are playing it somewhere else and you are in a different cultural background, you are in a different environment with different circumstances all over. And localization in the sense of I'm going to get this and transform into something that is Brazilian. I don't know if Mariana wants to add something to that.
I just want to add that when we are talking about localization, all the industry in Brazil, that's why I pointed out to Microsoft and everything. We changed it to more to see the monetization as Philippe put it. And I think that a Dota game of Monica would be swell if the EA person is still there. But if you think about it, the indie games now in Brazil were like where the monetization is, because we are like on the next step after the pick-up woodpecker thing. But we have like a gap here there. We have like between Tectoy and Microsoft coming back and start to Xbox Live and the network distribution of games. We have like a very empty, I would say, place of production games. I'm not saying that because this is a heuristic view of mine. We have like before we have the government that we have, we had like some investments and tracing and mapping the Brazilian industry of games. And of course, I have a lot, I would say like a lot of magazines from the 70s and the 80s and everything, and then started here because me, I am a collection, so I collect everything. And also books now in Brazil that talk about the difference. And then you can really see the localization, the creation, the creolization, and this kind of nostalgia books about masculinity. And what you see now when you see the industry trying to make the Brazilian industry games like really work outside. So this is our current research, right, Philippe, to see now what happened with this Tectoy thing and how these games and this experience with this SEGA games, Japanese games, Nintendo games is like turning like putting light in our industry nowadays. So yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions and the responses. It's kind of as a bummer to have to end this great panel we've had here, but we are at 3 o'clock Central Time, so we're going to take a 15-minute break now. Let's once again thank the presenters for their wonderful work. We'll keep the channel open and see you in 15 minutes. Thanks, everybody.